Welcome to The Bookworm, which this week comes from Oxford. Later in the programme, Bill Bryson dissects the British way of life.
There are certain things that you have to be British to appreciate. Sooty, skiffle music, that Morecambe and Wise segment in which Angela Rippon shows off her legs by dancing.
We've the Bookworm Guide to Teenage Angst. And on this Remembrance Sunday, veterans and their loved ones choose poems that have a special meaning for them. But first, we're on the trail of C.S. Lewis here in Oxford. And we begin not here amongst the cloistered halls of Academe, nor its splendid libraries, but here to a small estate on the wrong side of the ring road. Because this modest red brick house is about to become another landmark on the Oxford tourist map. It's due to be restored by an American foundation because for 30 years it was the home of C.S. Lewis and the place where he wrote his famous Narnia Chronicles about a magic land that could be reached through a wardrobe. The land is in the grip of evil, personified by the White Witch, who has cast Narnia into eternal winter. The forces of good return in the shape of the lion, Aslan, who comes to reclaim his kingdom. Every reader wants his or her own personal ticket to Narnia. The C.S. Lewis Society meet weekly in his favourite pub to discuss Jack Lewis and his work.
From 1930 till he died, 1963.
Tourists come from America just to gaze at the outside of this house. But what do they hope to find? This may not be everyone's idea of a literary shrine, but that's possibly because although the foundation have bought the place and intend to restore it, at the moment it's still being used as student digs. What we can discover of Lewis here, I've no idea. Let's go and see. Possibly a wardrobe.
This is the land of Narnia, said the faun. All that lies between the lamppost and the great castle of Cair Paravel on the eastern sea.
Not much Narnia magic here, but was there ever? Those who knew him say the house was as much of a mess when Lewis lived here as it is today.
His housekeeping talents would be described as a negative quantity. When I first came to the kilns, we have to remember that the place had been let go to rack and ruin by Jack and Warnie for probably 20 or 30 years. They had done nothing. They were both heavy smokers, and they had this superstition that cigarette ash was good for carpets because it kept the moths out. And so the carpets were just thick with cigarette ash. And the place was a shambles. His friends used to call it the midden, which is an old term for a dung heap. They wouldn't come here to dinner in case they got food poisoning.
As a bachelor don, it would have been more usual for Lewis to live here at his college, Magdalen. But, for whatever reason, he chose to make a home here, at the kilns, for his strangely assorted household. There was his brother Warnie, Mrs. Moore and her daughter Maureen, the mother and sister of a friend who'd been killed in action. Paxi the gardener, the model for Puddleglum, the marsh wiggle in the Narnia books. Molly Miller, the seemingly underused housekeeper. And Joy Gresham, whose love affair with Lewis was later the subject of the film Shadowlands. She first wrote to him inquiring about wardrobes.
Am I right that you are as fascinated as I am by the image of the unfound door? The mythical door that leads out of time and space into where? The undiscovered country? The never-never land? Is this your land of Narnia that you get to through the magic wardrobe?
But how will the C.S. Lewis Foundation ever recreate the midden and its much-sought-after wardrobe?
I mean, the programme, we've been to the Bronte house, and that's a very pretty little place.
Yeah. Well, they said that
but
this
you
was
don't think this is going to be much of a Bronte house. It's going to be very pretty Laura Ashley wallpaper here.
No, but it will be nice. The story was there was a house of books held up by cobwebs.
And what else? What other things have you got?
Well, we'll attempt to get out the word that any and all pieces of furniture, books, any of the elements of the household that used to be here. Now that the house is secure and safe, we would love to see them come back.
Right, so the big question is, does that include the wardrobe?
Does it include the wardrobe? Well, I'm afraid to say that, I mean, the wardrobe was sold at auction to Wheaton College. They have the wardrobe at the Wade Center, and they've taken good care of it.
And that is, that is definitely the wardrobe. There's no doubt about that.
Yes, so it is definitely the wardrobe. Now, there is a second wardrobe, which is at Westmont College in Santa Barbara, California.
That's a fake wardrobe.
No, it's not a fake wardrobe, but there were numerous wardrobes
There were
in the
several
house. But there's the big
Yeah.
carved piece that came, I think, out of Little Lee in Northern Ireland, which used to sit out there in the hallway. That's the one that typically one considers the wardrobe.
Yeah.
The wardrobe came from the house in Northern Ireland, where Lewis grew up. His mother died when he was 9 years old, and with Warnie away at school, he grew up in dreamy solitude. He described himself as the product of long corridors, upstairs indoor silences, and the noise of wind under the tiles. He passed the time drawing childish versions of what was to become his land of Narnia. And in later life, the land and its inhabitants returned to him in dreams.
First, there was no lion in it, but then he'd been having dreams about lions. This was after the war, I think about 1948. And then suddenly Aslan came bounding into it and pulled all the rest of the stories with him. See, Lewis made it very clear, I never made a story. It was to him more like taking dictation.
As Aslan began to appear in his dreams, Lewis's life was changed forever. He was on a bus going up Headington Hill when God first came to him, and he later described it as being like a snowman at last beginning to melt. And on another occasion, he described it as having a corset mercifully released. Those are both rather typical Lewis images, combining the everyday and the sublime. It's this quality that means that some people never seem to grow out of the Narnia books.
There is, in fact, quite a lot to be said about the part wardrobes played in Lewis's imagination. A very great deal can be said long before we need start sniffing about for recondite erotic typology.
Aslan is, as it were, an imaginative picture of God. I think one of the great things about the Narnia books is that it shows what it feels like, really, to believe in God.
He was the kind of person that you always, when something's going wrong, you always think, well, who's there I could turn to? And Aslan was the sort of Narnia person that they'd always turn to.
You can't understand Lewis without realizing that he was a Christian and that he held all the central beliefs of Christianity with depth and passion.
The cold, wintry place in Narnia was like that because everyone in the wintry place was evil, so then everything around them turned evil. But when Aslan came, he brought hope, and he was like the saviour, so everything melted away and flowers grew back and things.
If Lewis's inspiration came in dreams or from God, what can anyone hope to find in this house?
Of course, the house can tell us something about Jack's family life and how he lived as a man and the shell that encompassed and contained his family relationships. But I don't think it can tell us very much about the inspiration of his works at all. It was just a place that he lived in, really. It didn't inspire him because if it had, he wouldn't have let it go to pieces. He wouldn't let it fall apart around him the way he did for so many years.
But then, of course, you might always find some old wardrobe or other. Yes, this is a bit more like it. For, as any child will tell you, it's easy to get to Narnia. All you have to do is read the books.